Hi, everyone. Here are some best practices for preparing to draft the researched argument essay. The final draft of your researched argument essay should be between 2,250 words and 2,500 words. This draft should also include at least 7 sources. 4 or more of those should be scholarly peer-reviewed sources, and you can have up to 3 sources written for a public or general audience. This draft should also contain an introduction, several support paragraphs, and a conclusion paragraph. And this video is going to explain what exactly should belong to each of those sections. Before we jump into global expectations into any more detail, however, I just want to tell you all not to panic. I know that longer papers can seem like an impossible undertaking, especially if you have not written such a long paper before. However, longer papers, or especially this one, are actually more achievable when you outline or you plan your paper before you sit down to write the first full draft, and that's exactly what we're going to do. At this point in the creation process, the best thing I can encourage you to do is to really spend time with your sources. I recommend creating a Google Doc and keeping a running list of significant quotes from each of those sources. And since you're already going to be in that Google Doc anyway, I would encourage you to go ahead and include those page numbers because that will make your life and the citation process a lot easier later down the line. You want the introduction portion of this paper to predominantly accomplish 3 things. First, you want to define and briefly describe your topic, the problem that you have chosen to center your researched argument essay around. Secondly, you're going to want to state your research question. And finally, the last sentence or 2 sentences of your introduction paragraph should state your solution to the problem. This proposed solution for the purposes of this paper acts as your thesis, and you're going to want to state that solution as succinctly as possible, as clearly and in as few words as possible. Basically, you want to tell your reader who should do what to solve the problem that you've chosen to talk about, and how and why should they go about that solution. You are then going to spend your support paragraphs explaining the complexities of both the problem and your proposed solution. And there are several ways that you can go about approaching your support paragraphs. Regardless of the content of your support paragraphs, however, you should plan to write 8 to 12, and each of those paragraphs should follow the same pi plus t repeating model that we used in writing Project 1. And I've included the breakdown of that model here again in case you need the refresher. I know you might be thinking, okay, 8 to 12 support paragraphs sounds like a lot. How on earth am I supposed to find so many things to say? But this is where proper engagement with your source material really comes in handy. So I would encourage you throughout your support paragraphs to really take your time explaining each source's ideas, as long as those ideas are relevant to your research question, the problem, or the solution that you're advocating for. But rather than devote one paragraph of summary to each source, in which case you would have 7 paragraphs in a row where you're just writing a literature review for every source that appears in your paper, what you're going to try to do is synthesize the author's points. And remember, synthesis means that we're going to group sources together in order to compare and contrast what they have to say. I am much more interested in this kind of demonstration of your critical thinking skills than a rote book report in which you just repeat verbatim what other people have said. One way to stay on track is to remember that you are writing a researched argument essay. So all of the sources that you're presenting, even though it's important to accurately represent what the conversation has looked like in the past. You should be couching what others have said within your own analysis. Because your reader is going to be much more interested in what you think about the sources that you have found in order to prove your own argument. So imagine your sources in direct conversation with one another and consider how and where you want to introduce each of these sources in your support paragraphs. And one way to do this is to consider who agrees with whom, who disagrees with whom, and who are the outliers in this conversation. There are several questions that you can ask yourself that can help you put these sources in conversation with one another and synthesize what authors have had to say. You'll want to determine whether or not each source acknowledges that whatever problem you've chosen actually exists. Do you have competing experts in one conversation? If the authors all acknowledge that the problem exists, then you can move into the nuances of how each source defines the problem at hand. And do those definitions differ from one another at all? How big of an issue do the authors that you found consider the problem to be if they acknowledge that the problem exists and they define the problem in the same way? Then, do they also agree that this is a big issue, a small issue, an issue that is perhaps not as important? What's the value that they place on this issue? And finally, what do the authors propose should be done about this issue? Do they explicitly propose those solutions? Do they lay those solutions out for the reader, or are they implied solutions? These are ways that you can group authors together as if they're in direct conversation. After you've summarized the conversation surrounding your problem, then you're going to want to stage the complexities of your own intervention. And although your thesis will summarize your proposed solution, you should commit several support paragraphs to describing how exactly the solution should be enacted and who is responsible for enacting that solution. In this section of your paper, you're going to want to walk your reader through why your proposed solution is the best choice. After you've explained the details of your solution, you're ready to wrap up your researched argument essay with a conclusion paragraph. This conclusion paragraph should start with the restated thesis, in which you'll remind your reader what the main idea of your paper is, and then there are a couple of questions that you can answer. You can explain to your reader why this conversation matters, both within and outside of whatever field the topic that you've chosen exists within. You could also answer what the conversation will look like in the future. So if your readers take your proposed solution seriously and they move forward with that, what then? What happens next? If you were to write a part 2 of this paper, what would that paper then look like? You can also talk about what's at stake if the problem is not addressed. If this problem continues to exist, what then? Basically here you want to stress why your reader should care about this problem and the solution. At this point you might be thinking, okay, this is a lot of information. Where should I start? And I would encourage you to start this drafting process by creating an outline of your researched argument essay. Write your introduction paragraph, including your research question and your tentative thesis. Even if it changes a little bit, that's okay. Write the topic sentences for your support paragraphs so that you can map how your paper is going to progress. And then write your conclusion. And following this kind of outline enables you to have the bookends of your paper through the introduction and the conclusion paragraphs. And you have all of the main ideas, at least on paper, in this outline. And then you can get into the more local concerns of in what order those topic sentences should appear. But this covers all of the main ideas that will be presented in your paper. I'm looking forward to seeing your outlines for the research argument essay. And of course, if you have any questions, you can email me at ande1204@purdue.edu. Thanks.